I am so thrilled to be here. My name's Emily Jacobs. I am a professor of neuroscience at UC Santa Barbara, and I am director of the Anna S. Bowers Women's Brain Health Initiative and a very proud member of the Coalition for Women's Brain Health. My entry into neuroscience and women's health started in graduate school, and it really started with a sort of observation of what as neuroscientists we don't know as much as what we do know, and that really started with I think I was preparing for my qualifying exam, and I was in a lab that was studying dopamine, and I didn't know a lick about dopamine. I came straight from undergrad, and so I sort of locked myself in a room, and for 6 months I just devoured as much of the literature as I could. And it was in that period of time that I stumbled on some beautiful work from a woman named Jill Becker at University of Michigan. And she was working in rodent models. And she showed that in female rodents, the sort of dopamine release in a particular pathway in the brain is modulated by estrogen. So across the rodent estrous cycle, you can get more or less dopamine release into the prefrontal cortex, into the striatum, depending on her endocrine status. And I was blown away because nobody was thinking about the role of sex differences or even hormones, so sort of female specific health factors in the human neuroscience domain. And that moment was really defining for me. So I said, this is going to be my thesis. I want to understand hormonal modulation of major neurochemical pathways in the human brain. And that, just kind of kept following that thread. And here I am 20 years later and realizing there's so much yet to discover about women's brain health. So it started early. My lab is really focused on shining a spotlight on women's brain health over the life course. So we have done studies across the menstrual cycle, across pregnancy, across menopause, and we're really trying to think of each of these major endocrine transitions as neurological transitions that can inform us about both basic properties of the human brain, how it responds to hormones, and also why these endocrine transitions are also periods of both resilience and vulnerability. Like, what is it about the transition into puberty or into pregnancy or into menopause that can be these sort of inflection points for health outcomes? And as a field, we really have not studied women's brain health in a comprehensive and serious way until now. So I think there's a lot of both basic science to learn that can inform clinical care. And I'm happy to give some examples of specific initiatives. In the last few years, my lab has really taken a pretty new approach to human brain imaging. So it used to be the case that when we were studying the brain, we would take a big group of people and put them in the brain imaging scanner, maybe draw their blood and make these associations between hormones and brain function in a cross-sectional manner. And a lot has been learned through that approach. But this is something I always teach my students of neuroendocrinology. One of the biggest features of the mammalian endocrine system is that hormones ebb and flow over time. We have circadian rhythms, we have the estrous cycle, we see major changes across pregnancy and menopause. And cross-sectional studies that sort of sample the brain at a single time point are missing the beauty of that sort of dynamic system. So starting about maybe 7 years ago, my lab started using something called precision brain imaging. So this idea that we don't need to scan 30 people once. What if we scan one person 30 times, right? Or 60 times or 100 times? But we do so across these endocrine transitions. And it turns out it has completely transformed what we think about the human brain. My brilliant graduate student, Laura Pritchett, published a landmark paper scanning herself every single day, every 24 hours across the complete menstrual cycle, showing that the surge in estrogen around the time of ovulation can actually sort of increase coherence in the brain. This is like a marker using resting state functional connectivity. When she goes on a drug that suppresses hormone, we can sort of abolish this effect. It's not just brain connectivity. We can see changes in regions of the brain like the hippocampus that we know are very responsive to steroid hormones, and the volume of these structures actually ebbs and flow in lockstep with these endocrine signals. But that's only been revealed through this use of precision imaging. So I'm super excited to see new technologies, innovative kind of computational approaches, really being applied to women's health. And that's happening now as you get like, neuroscientists and women's health experts joining forces. Another project I'm super excited about, in 2024, my team published the first map of the human brain across pregnancy. So this too is a precision imaging study. We took a single woman who was followed from preconception every 2 weeks throughout the gestational period up to 2 years postpartum. And we simply mapped the dynamic changes that happen in the human brain. And there are basically sweeping changes in gray matter volume and white matter microstructure, in sort of ventricular size. And we can see this process, this metamorphosis, if you will, we can see it unfold week by week, establishing these normative trajectories. And that project, I mean, it sort of kills me that in 2024, it was the first glimpse we'd had at the pregnant brain. This is the human brain undergoing incredible degrees of neuroplasticity. And I think changed what neuroscientists thought was capable in terms of how the adult brain is actually capable of this degree of neuroplasticity. And we did it by just paying very careful attention to female-specific experiences. And because neuroscience as a field had really overlooked women's health factors, these like basic nuggets of gold, this wisdom was lying just under the surface of our knowledge because we had not yet paid attention to women in a serious way. So I have to wonder, like, what other major discoveries are lying there if we just study women in a serious way. I think for a long time, the story has been that women's health, women's brain health is understudied and underfunded, and that is true to this day. We know that less than 10% of the NIH budget goes to conditions that primarily affect women. In my discipline of neuroscience, less than half of 1% of brain imaging studies focus on health factors specific to women, less than half of 1%. So that's everything we know about how the brain responds to pregnancy or the menstrual cycle or menopause or hormone therapy or the neurological consequences of endometriosis or PCOS, right? Half of 1%. So you could look at that statistic and feel bummed out. I look at that statistic and see opportunity. I think that there is now, especially with the Coalition for Women's Brain Health, creating this incredible coalition of women around the globe who have focused on this sort of in isolation, but you're creating a community where now we have space to band together, to join our efforts. I think this is a watershed moment for women's health and women's brain health in particular. I think that what we're going to learn in the next 20 years is going to eclipse what we've learned in the last 100. That's through, yes, the development of new technology, but also just an impossible ability to look away from this problem any longer, right? We know the problem statement. We know how little women's brain health has been studied. But now that that's established, we can move into solution mode. What do we need to do? What are the data sets we need to generate? What are the kinds of questions we need to ask? What are the new technologies we need to adopt to make major advancements? It's exciting to be in that phase of the journey. You are entering mile one of a marathon. So, this is an amazing time for trainees, for early career investigators to join the cause, to pick up the banner and carry it as far as you can, because as this field really comes into itself and is really formalized in a major way for the first time, there is so much to do. I think there's 5,000, 10,000 careers ready to be made by studying women's brain health. And we just need really talented and motivated people to do it.